Okay, we're going to go ahead and get started. And thanks everyone for coming out this morning. It's hard to believe it was snowing yesterday, and the legislature was in session, and we were wearing masks. So it's a new day in Albuquerque for sure. But we want to talk about what did happen yesterday, and Albuquerque's perspective, and of course our police department's perspective on the various legislative initiatives. And I think in general, want to state that it was a bit of a mixed bag. We obviously got some wins, and we're grateful for those. And we're going to use those going forward to make the city better. We also didn't get a lot of things when it came to homelessness, and also when it came to the revolving door. So we're going to keep fighting for those challenges in whatever round is up next. Now, we began the session by connecting it to our initiatives last summer with the Metro Crime Initiative. And the Metro Crime Initiative brought together law enforcement partners from everywhere in the metro area, including the governor's office, including legislators. And it came up with a broad agenda that basically said that to actually try and fight crime in Albuquerque, we all have to do our part. And so each agency has a set of to-do lists, and we've been working on those. But we also had a to-do list for the legislature. And that to-do list had 9 items on it. And we, as I said, in terms of a mixed bag, we got 5 out of 9. So we did get some things that are really helpful, and as I mentioned, we also have some things that we still desperately need help on. So we're going to talk about those here today. But I also want to reiterate that what we saw in the debates in the session are a reflection of the fact that no single person or no single office or single jurisdiction can single-handedly fix the criminal justice system. We actually need all parts of the criminal justice system to work on this. That absolutely includes the pieces that the legislature controls, whether it's the criminal code or whether it's funding for the courts. And these are, again, some areas where we had some movement, some success, some change, and some areas where we still need much more help. Now, we also know that this was definitely a session that moved us forward, and I think that is a good thing. This is the first session, especially in a 30-day session, and we appreciate the governor joining us and supporting this as being a crime session. That was different than past years. And I think we saw that in the results. We had some progress on crime, and that is a very good thing. It's something we have not had in the past. Now, we brought solutions that would help close the revolving door, crack down on gun violence, strengthen police departments, and rebuild the behavioral health system, and help us deal with homelessness and related addiction challenges here in Albuquerque. And what we were able to get, and we're grateful to get, is we were able to get some assistance when it comes to ankle bracelet and monitoring. We were able to get assistance when it came to gun violent crime enhancements, so that we hold people to a different standard when they actually use a firearm or brandish a firearm, because a life could be lost. That's why that was so important. We also know we have increased funding in the court system, which was desperately needed and something we fought for, including an extra judge right here in the metro, which is something we desperately need. So we still have much, much farther to go. And I want to emphasize this does not mean there is justice for victims of violence. We're going to have some of those victims speak here with us today. But it does mean that we have shown that the legislature, when properly primed and worked with, can take action on crime. And so we expect more and we hope for more in the future. Now, we also know that APD is in a better place coming out of this session than they were going in. And that has to do with some of the details also around our violence intervention program. This has been one of our marquee efforts to prevent violence from happening in the first place, but in a very tough on crime way, but in a way that pulls somebody out of that system of retribution when it comes to violent crime. And so this was now funded statewide. This is a big deal for New Mexicans. And this is something that has proven successful in a couple of other states around the country, especially Connecticut. It's something we've been fighting for the last 3 years, and it's something we're grateful finally passed. Similarly, around auto theft, known as the Chop Shop bill, is going to help our criminal justice system deal with auto theft in a much, much more effective way. So before I hand it off, I want to mention, I think, as we reflect a little bit on the session, I asked the question, are communities better off at the end of this session when it comes to crime than they were going in? And I think the answer to that is yes. That's the good news here. There are steps forward that can continue. But because the work is not done, we still urgently need help. And I have a feeling that the situation is not going to be any different, whether there's a special session later in the year or whether it's the 60-day session after the election. crime and homelessness and addiction and behavioral health are going to be at the top of the agenda, and they should be, until it is not the #1 issue facing our communities. We know that in our session, the Albuquerque metro area in the Metro Crime Initiative roughly represents 900,000 voices. And those 900,000 voices say we need action on crime and we need action on homelessness. And I don't think those voices are going to change what they're saying over the next year. So we hope that in the meantime, we can work on plans over the interim so that when we come into session, we can take the ball much, much further down the field than we did this session. So we're going to continue to work to see this through the next round. And I also want to mention we are very excited about the funding we got on a number of fronts. So we got over $50 million in capital outlay funding for several needed projects. And so our COO, Lawrence Rael, is going to walk us through those improvements that that funding that we're grateful for. Lawrence?
Thank you, Mayor. And as the Mayor said, when we go to Santa Fe to visit with our legislators and talk about the needs for the city of Albuquerque, I really always put these in two buckets. One is the policy discussion the Mayor just went through as it relates to gun violence, et cetera, and the crime issues that we face in our community and, quite frankly, that we face across the state. The other piece is actually asking the legislators for help for capital outlay to build the infrastructure that we need in our community so that we can continue to grow and prosper here in Albuquerque and across New Mexico. So look, $50 million is a very significant investment in Albuquerque, and that's an important piece. As the Mayor said, the legislators and listened to the administration, listened to our city councilors as we went up and talked about different investments across the city that are desperately needed to address some of the issues that we face as a growing community. And fortunately, again, they provided some funding in some very important areas of the city. Areas around transportation, our infrastructure, our roadway systems, making sure that we have a safe passage for folks that commute in and out of the city, et cetera. Also invested in our community centers, a lot of money for different community centers across the city. Some reinvestment in some areas of the city that are really important as we see redevelopment occurring, especially in the Sawmill area. But then again, looking at the walkability for the city in terms of safety, in terms of the initiative that the Mayor started several years ago, which is this, working around to make sure that we have better walking spaces and better transportation systems for our community. But also a little bit in the public safety arena. We were able to get $3 million for the Catherine and San Mateo project that will be the home for our fire department and also eventually a home for our community safety department. So that is an important investment in the public safety arena. But again, $12 million across the board for community centers. And let me just mention a few of them. Westgate Community Center, Los Volcanes Community Center, investments in our library, the International District Library, and South San Jose also Community Center also received some funding. And we'll go through the list and get the list tabulated for all of you so that if you all want to have more details on it, we can certainly give it to you after this conversation today. But as the Mayor said, we had some significant requests in two specific areas, in public safety infrastructure and in housing, and funding to deal with our two most important issues that face our community, our crime issues and our housing and homelessness issues. And unfortunately, we didn't quite get there. We were somewhat disappointed that we were not able to get the funding that we needed, in particular to invest in this facility behind us, the Albuquerque Police Department's main headquarters. This facility is very old. It has some very significant issues with just its mechanical systems, with its infrastructure, some code violations that, as a result of codes that have been updated, this building needs a significant facelift. And unfortunately, we were not able to get that kind of funding. But we also know that we needed money for our Gateway Center, our important project that we've been working on for over 3.5 years to bring a shelter online to support and to help those individuals in our community that don't have a place to sleep at night, that need services and that need a comprehensive array of services, not just for them, but also for the southeast area part of the city of Albuquerque. Unfortunately, our ask for $30 million did not quite make the mark, but look, that's not going to deter our work. We're going to continue to move forward and continue to work with our legislators and the governor and work with our city council and our community here and try and move forward with getting that project underway. Last but not least, look, we are the largest city in the state. We generate a tremendous amount of economic activity for New Mexico, and it's important that we invest in this economic engine to ensure that the rest of New Mexico can grow and prosper. And so our request to the legislature really as a reflection of that investment that needs to happen here so that the state of New Mexico as a whole can move forward. So we'll continue to move in those directions and again, lobby our legislators as we move forward. And so I know many of you will have some questions on specific projects, and we'll be happy to answer them after that. But with that, I'll turn it over to the mayor.
Thank you, Lawrence. And specifically in that Gateway Center, we had asked for a crisis triage center, a medical respite facility. These all have to do with primarily addiction, and doubling the size of Turquoise Lodge. So I think Turquoise Lodge did get some expansion funding. So again, more details on that specifically we can touch on later. Now we do want to talk about what this legislature meant for our officers, the men and women in our Albuquerque Police Department. And here to speak on that is Deputy Chief Brown. Chief?
Good morning. My name is Josh Brown. I'm the Deputy Chief of Field Services. We talked a lot this morning about, how these are to make Albuquerque safer. But at the end of the day, it's the officers on the field that, have to enforce these laws and make sure that we're protecting the citizens of Albuquerque. It's a good start. There's lots of work still to be done. We got some good work to do on the GPS monitoring programs, allowing detectives to go out and actually get these people who are actively committing crimes. Commander Jones will touch a little bit more on that in a minute. Another thing that we now have some teeth into is our chop shop bill. That's something that when I first started in auto theft in 2014, is something that the detectives had a hard time with people who were operating enterprises for profit. There really was no teeth to go after that. This gives another tool in the toolbox for auto theft detectives to be able to really go after those people who are in the process of a nefarious activity for strictly profit, looking at selling people's cars, victimizing people, and creating more victims by doing VIN switches and then pushing those cars back out into the public. We had recently a couple of field briefings. I had 12 of them actually through each area command. And what we did, we talked about one of the biggest things to an officer's morale and the work that they do is the revolving door that they continually face with arresting the same people over and over again. We made good strides in the recent legislation on certain aspects of it with chop shop, banishing a firearm, the GPS bills. With the case management order and things of the past, there's still work to be done on how we keep these people who are habitual offenders, from property crimes to violent crimes, and who really affect the quality of life of the citizens of Albuquerque. That's the biggest issue that our officers face every day is just that repeat. I arrest the same guy over and over again. And how do we function and make it to where these people are held accountable and these officers feel like they're making a difference? So I think there's still a lot of work to be doing. I think a good unified front. No pointing fingers. It's how do we work with the legislature? How do we work with our lawmakers, our joint law enforcement agencies, coming up with a plan in the future on how we best move forward, what's important to the citizens of Albuquerque. But also, when you look at the legislature, everybody says, we try to push things, it's an Albuquerque problem. This affects the entire state. And this is something that we need to look at as a statewide level. And because it's not just Albuquerque. People here have family in the Four Corners, down to Las Cruces. This affects everybody as a whole. So I think there's moving forward to having a good unified front and getting with our partners in law enforcement, the legislature. Like I said, it's a good start, but there's more work to be done. So thank you.
Thanks. Now we mentioned some of the areas around court funding as well, and again that GPS monitoring. And with us to speak on that, we have Commander Jones. Commander.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So good morning, everybody. My name is Aaron Jones. I'm the interim commander for the Investigative Support Division. And the City of Albuquerque and the Police Department, we went into this session with looking for a comprehensive improvements with the pretrial services section, among other things. To be sure, we did not get everything that we wanted, but it is a step in the right direction. With the new requirements of this bill concerning pretrial services and the GPS monitors, is a requirement that GPS data is shared with law enforcement as soon as it's needed when there's a situation which would necessitate that information being relayed to law enforcement. And it matters to the officers in the front lines, the officers that work for Deputy Chief Brown, and also the detectives who work in my division and others. And it also is important for the community. I want to be very clear that our citizens deserve to know when someone is charged with a crime that they will no longer be a danger to our community and the citizens within our community, and that the system will keep them safe. Part of that is sharing information with law enforcement in a timely manner. We all know that we've probably experienced in our time frame that information is best right away, as soon as it's coming out, especially whenever we're talking about high-risk offenders and our police officers trying to apprehend those high-risk offenders. Requirements to share ankle monitor GPS data makes a difference in those critical moments. We've seen what happens when this information isn't shared. There's two examples that I'd like to bring up today, one being Daniel Drake and the other one Devin Mumford. Mumford, while he was out on pretrial monitoring, committed a homicide. After he committed that homicide, he then went around the city, armed with a shotgun, and fired his weapon at an elderly woman within our city. And then he attempted to rob a convenience store. All of this while he was on an ankle monitor. That's unacceptable. Now, when that happens, our APD officers and the detectives, we can't be waiting days, which happened in this case, before we get the GPS data. The other example is Daniel Drake. Daniel Drake was on an ankle monitor. He cut that ankle monitor off. Our department was notified that he had cut the ankle monitor off, and it took, yet again, days for us to get the information back on where the GPS data showed us that he was last known. This change requires that the data is shared with APD as soon as it's needed. When they need information about individuals believed to have reoffended or broken the conditions of release. Now, I'll talk about the funding for our courts. As the mayor said, we and others stressed importance of funding and staffing the entire judicial system. We're very pleased to see the work that began with funding our judicial system in the courts. We know that after this legislative session that we have an addition of a new judge for the second Judicial District Court. So we see the improvements. Although it's not it's not everything that we wanted, it is a step in the right direction. Thank you for your time, Mr. Mayor.
Now we want to talk about our efforts to expand the VIP program, something we started about 2 years ago, and we desperately needed statewide because we know that criminal activity, especially narcotics and everything in between, even auto theft, all of this is not tied to Albuquerque's borders. We know this intuitively, but we don't always honor that legally, and we don't always honor it programmatically. Now with the statewide violence intervention program, we're going to be able to do that with respect to trying to pull people out of the cycle of retribution for violent crime. So our coordinator on that is going to speak to it, Jerry Bachicha.
Thank you, Mayor Keller. Good morning, everyone. The Violence Intervention Program was implemented in the city in March of 2020 when the whole city and actually the entire world was dealing with the repercussions of a global pandemic. This is a cross-departmental effort by the city of Albuquerque. Our partners are APD, as well as Family and Community Services, and recently the Albuquerque Community Safety Division has joined our partnership as well. This is an evidence-based and a research-based program. We intervene in the cycles of gun violence through a public health lens. The partnerships that we have created in the community support this work and have given us a success rate of 93%, which is one of the highest success rates for the individuals in programs like ours in the entire United States. Because we've done this on a shoestring budget with, for the most part in the program, one case manager who is an individual with lived experience in the cycles of gun violence. We have a wonderful success rate, but we need to expand our efforts to make an impact in the city. So we are very happy that the legislature acknowledged that the public health approach to the gun violence reduction and aggravated assault reduction in the state of New Mexico is one of their top priorities. And they acknowledge that it needs to be expanded across the state. This is a highly replicable model that can be used in rural areas as well as in urban areas. And we look forward in the future to working with the Department of Health to make sure that the violence in our state, not only Albuquerque, but in our state, continues to decline.
Now, before we take some questions, we want to take a moment to listen to some of the families who have been affected by crime in our community. We spoke about the Mumford case earlier, and Angel Larry is going to share her perspective on this. And so I'm going to really just hand it off to her voice without sort of introducing her further. But I want to mention this. We have to listen to victims. And it's something, when I say we, I mean elected officials. It's something that we have not done enough in the past, and especially at the legislature. And so this year, again, I think their voice was heard more, but it needs to be heard much, much more. And Angel, you can share further.
Good morning, and thank you everyone for being here. As he said, my name is Angel, and my son was Devin Trey Hayborn. He was shot and killed 301 days ago, and I must say it's been a tough and emotional journey, but I feel his untimely death has brought us to where we are here right now, and that he in some way is helping us and guide us and lead us in the right direction. We still have so much more work to do, but I feel that there is steps in the right direction with our elected officials stepping up to the plate, the Metro Crime Initiative, and the legislation that was passed. I won't say I'm not disappointed that some of the other bills didn't go through, but that last minute crime bill that was pushed through, I'm just asking that the governor reads through it and signs it and goes through every line to make sure that all the wording's correct and that we benefit from this. No other families need to go through this, what I'm experiencing, as well as the other families experiencing the loss of loved ones. What I will say in the step of the right direction, the VIP program I've currently been volunteering with, and I will say from personal experience and actually being out on the field that it does work, that it's very important, that all these things are going to take years to come with the drug addiction counseling, mental health counseling, the VIP program. This is not going to be an easy, quick fix. But what we do need is the quick fix of keeping these criminals in until all the rest can fall into place. So I'm asking everybody to get involved. As our mayor said, the Metro Crime Initiative has 900 voices that have said that we need this to happen. Well, I'm here to ask those 900 plus voices to be a part of it. Yes, it's our elected officials' duties to represent and do their part, but it's our part as well. And I must say I didn't get involved until it hit home. So I'm here to reach out and ask everyone to be a part, not just your voices, get involved. Everybody from the home front on, have talks with your children, your grandchildren. We need to get to that point where everything was simpler and it wasn't about taking out a weapon to kill. We need to get back to the basics, common knowledge, keeping criminals in when they commit a crime, watching them. If you say you're going to monitor them, let's monitor them. That's all I really have to say. So please, Albuquerque and New Mexico, get involved.
The victims community and the Crusaders for Justice, I just want to thank them for their courage to convert after everything they've been through, to try and convert that to action so that it doesn't create more victims is something that our city is grateful for and that I'm grateful for. Thank you so much. And they've had to learn the legislative process and everything like everyone else, which is obviously very confusing and convoluted, but I do think it's a testament to the fact that people's voice matters, and theirs is starting to matter more and more, and it should. We're optimistic that in the future it will continue to be heard more. So with that, we'll certainly take some questions from folks, and I would just add that a lot of times people say, well, why didn't the governor do this, why didn't the mayor do that, or this and that. Look, I was in the legislature. They're elected officials. I believe that they did what they felt was right, and I respect that, even if we disagree with them. But they're their own elected officials, and they're not under the control of any other elected officials. And so we do appreciate their service and the hard work. They certainly worked hard, especially at the end of this session. And so we appreciate them, especially for getting in at the 11th hour some of these needed changes, especially around crime. So, Ava, yeah? Okay.
Mayor Keller, before the session and during the session, you said that not enough on crime gets done. We may need a special session. Obviously, that's the governor's call. She said we're going to listen these next 20 days before we decide on that. Do you think enough has been done on the crime front to not need a special session, or are you calling for it?
Well, I have always supported a special session on crime, going back for at least 2 years, if not 2.5 years on this. And it's because we just can't let the clock be an excuse, right? It's always, we ran out of time and this and that. And that's what special sessions are for. They're for the most urgent needs in our community. I also think there might be some rationale around infrastructure. We haven't looked at all the federal funding and where it's going and so forth. So I do support it. But as my former colleagues know, I've always supported every special session. I mean, I wanted a special session to bring Tesla here. So I just think if our community needs help, we should be meeting all the time. So my stance hasn't changed on that. But it is obviously up to the governor and the legislature.
So following up on that, what area on the crime front is the one that is most urgent? When you look through the list, you look through the areas that we got accomplished and didn't, what's the most urgent need still for Albuquerque on the crime front?
It's got to be a big look at the revolving door and the drivers of that. So certainly there's issues around pretrial that we talked about in this session, but there's also issues around funding the behavioral health system that was dismantled, now about 10 years ago. We have to rebuild that, and it starts with money. Unfortunately, it's hard to hire people after that, but you've got to take one step at a time. And so I would love it to not be an issue of funding for a change. So that's one. And I would also mention in general, there's just a wholesale look that we need at our criminal code and what we're incentivizing and what we're not, right? We want to incentivize effective diversion. We want to make the red flag law actually work. These are all things that we just need time to do, and that's exactly what a special session is for. But I do want to say, I think the governor's answer is a very good one. We have some time to look at all the legislation and then figure out, what might make sense. So I do appreciate that you gotta really think through things before you start it. But in general, I'm always up for a special session.
Well, on sticking on the crime front, if it's just capital questions, the violence intervention program, Jerry mentioned there's one caseworker. I know I heard her say I'd like to have 40. I heard Sarita say we need to increase that tenfold. How many more caseworkers and funding is coming from the violence intervention program to make this an effective program on a larger scale?
Jerry can speak to this in detail, but the first step is always to go get the money, and then you got to figure out how to actually execute and implement and so forth. So we're certainly going to do that. It is a statewide program, so Albuquerque obviously has a major role in that, but I'm not sure, every one of those details is buttoned down yet, nor should it be, because, the bill hasn't even been signed. But Jerry, do you want to add anything else to that in terms of what we need?
Thanks for the question, Ryan. Yeah, 40 to 100. But really, this is the most intensive case management model. The reason it works is because it's a different kind of social services model. And the folks that we work with, we sometimes talk to 2 and 3 times a day. And so you can imagine with one caseworker, now since I've talked to you, we've increased to 2. And those caseworkers are on call day and night. We've expanded our program into the hospitals, and the hospitals are also calling us. The prisons have reached out to us. Can we work with people that are going to re-enter, that were involved in the cycles of gun violence? We just can't handle all the calls. So we expect to be able to expand potentially 6 workers with the funding that we get from the state legislature, and we'll be ever grateful for that. We also want to pay the folks that are working for us a living wage. And so many times in New Mexico, we put duct tape and Band-Aids on these problems, but we can't put duct tape and Band-Aids on intervention into the violent crime in our state. That's got to end. We've got to put the money towards both the urban areas as well as the rural areas. In the rural areas, per client, the actual cost per client is a lot higher. So I think the legislators need to acknowledge that that's going to happen, and that that's okay, so that they can build capacity in the rural areas of the state as well as in the urban areas.
Our COO, I just want to add before we go over to Capitol too, that the other aspect around a special session is, look, housing and homelessness. So I mentioned the connection between behavioral health, but it's a lot like crime. It tends to be viewed in Santa Fe as an urban issue or as a locality's challenge. And the reality is, when our challenges are this big for the largest city in New Mexico, they are a state challenge. So I also believe that homelessness in the metro area is a statewide worthy issue that we need help on. And so that's another area where we could look at some help through a special session.
Would you measure that as the biggest loss or biggest disappointment for the city's perspective as far as what didn't get done?
The short answer would be yes. Yeah, there just was very little discussion. Our legislation didn't go through, our funding request didn't go through. And I think we've stepped up as Albuquerque. So we try and demonstrate in the legislature, like, we've done X, Y, and Z, right? We got the Gateway Center. We are putting funding into it. We have the Community Safety Department. And we're doing, X amount of hundreds of more vouchers literally every day. And we can't do it alone. And we need the state's assistance. And so we're walking the walk, but we need a helping hand to walk down that path from Santa Fe.
So on that front, I think it's the 3rd, maybe 4th year you've gone to the session asking for money for the Gateway Center and gotten not a lot back. I think you got $400,000 this year out of a $30 million ask. Have you talked to lawmakers? I mean, is there a reason they're not putting money for this? I mean, are you getting a sense from people why this isn't something they're prioritizing capital money?
Well, I think in general, I would certainly say, first off, I think it was 3 years ago, we could cross-reference. We did get a substantial amount of funding in the past that we used. This year, the challenge was, I think, look, you've got a very short-term focus because it's an election cycle, and people want to put money into their neighborhoods, and that's very natural and normal in an election year. So there's not a whole lot of desire, to fund something that might be outside your district. Now, we would argue, right, that funding things like the Gateway Center helps homelessness anywhere in the metro area. But, they often view it as like, well, that facility is in one particular district. So that's kind of one hurdle that we certainly have this session. And I think the other one is, in a short session, we always have issues around housing and homelessness because they're not automatically sort of germane as part of the budget. So we tend to do better on these issues in a longer session when we can actually have hearings on housing shortages and things of this nature, which we had none of this session. So I think it's not entirely surprising, but it is very disappointing.
If there was a special session, I mean, do you think if they addressed housing and homelessness in the neighborhood, there would be a financial component to it? I don't know how that works.
There absolutely has to be. And again, the first step is setting aside the funding. And if you look at even something like a Turquoise Lodge, which is a wonderful state-funded program at the Gateway Center, we would give them all the space they want. And they would just have to fund the staffing for it. And we could have the largest treatment facility in the Southwest. Albuquerque can deliver that right now if New Mexico is willing to fund the operations. So this one, I think we should hear some perspective from law enforcement. I want to mention that, I think at least we had good debates on this. And so that was a positive step. It did get out of a committee and so forth. So this was the first time I think it was justly debated. But obviously it's very disappointing. And I also know there's different ways to deal with pretrial legally. I'm not a lawyer, so I'm not going to get into the details on this. But I think what we were missing was alternatives. People would say, well, this little thing is constitutional, this and that. What I did not see was 100 substitute bills, and that's what we should have seen, right? We should have seen 10 legislators trying to fix pretrial, and instead, I think we had to carry a lot of that burden just with one bill, and that's also something that we could do a lot better in a special session. I know, by the way, Damon has a hip issue, so he's the right guy to ask on this. So we can also go into more detail on that. But anyone else want to speak to that? All good? Okay. So our experts, out today, but more from him if you want. I can't resist, sorry.
That's what it's all about.
Can I get a quick reaction on the mask mandate lifted and the plans for the mask mandate pertaining to the city of Albuquerque?
Sure. So with respect to the mask mandate, we have also followed the state's lead, so it's no longer applicable for relevant city of Albuquerque facilities. We're going to do two things, though. Number one is we're going to watch the data. And, if there is a medically driven data need to look at that just for the city, we absolutely will. We do not see that at this point, but that's something we're going to watch. The second thing is we're going to look at specific areas. Remember, federal facilities still require it, which includes our bus system. And so if people are like, well, why is it here and not there? The answer is federal rules. So that's certainly still in place. And we are going to evaluate things like early childhood centers and so forth. And so we'll be looking at that next week.
How about your personal reaction?
Oh, liberating.
Anyone else?
I'm at the airport.
Yeah, and the airport is another one. So airport and buses are still regulated by the federal system and face masks are required.